Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thought we'd do something different today. We have the opportunity to get a good friend of mine on the channel to talk about, well, I offered him basically any topic in the world of popular culture to talk about. And he picked what we're going to talk about today, which is generally the Reacher series and things associated to that, as well as getting on to other things to do with reading. But rather than me rattling on and talking, I'll let the man introduce himself. Take it away.
Hello, I'm Ali Cornwolf. I know Chris from Filmguff. He's been a guest of ours a couple of times, normally talking about for a lot, a good length on boutique Blu-rays and films that we've bought. We've not done one for a while, but different things we've purchased. And you've come on and spoken in length about all the different things we've bought, and we've all enabled each other in our little chats. And then Chris, obviously, you started doing a lot about reading, and it's something that me and Kev kind of touch on a little bit, especially when a film is based on a book. But Kev's not much of a reader, and I am a little bit. I've recently been diagnosed with dyslexia, which has blew my mind a little bit. So I'm getting to grips with that, but it also explains why I tend to read quite slowly. So it does take me a while to get through some books, especially if they're a bit of an epic. And the weird thing is for me as well is that it probably explains why some books I struggle to get into them. I really struggle to sometimes, if it doesn't grab me in the first chapter or two, I'm not done. And I think it's the way they're written as well. But yeah, so yeah, I'm from the Filmguff Podcast, and I've got the F1 podcast and all sorts of stuff going on. You can find me anywhere. Either search for Ali Cornwall or Cornwolf is my alias. And yeah, we got talking, and because you started doing your book thing, we thought let's do a bit of Jack Reacher, which covers a multitude of different areas. You've got the books, which are a hell of a series of 20, is it 8 books or something like that now? We're getting very close to.
It's a large, long run series for sure. Like there's no doubt about that. Yeah,
it is. Yeah, I'm just in the process of reading through book 21, I think it is, which is Night School. And I know the next one, which I think is about 27, I think, or something like that, is due out in October. So he's churned them out over the years. And then obviously, off the back of that, he did the films with Tom Cruise, and then obviously the Alan Richman, who did the TV series on Amazon.
With Amazon Prime, which has already been renewed for a second series as well. And I suspect it's going to be a long-term project, I would imagine.
Yeah, it definitely, because it was after, so it was released on a Thursday or a Friday, and by the Monday it had been signed off for season 2. And I'm not sure if there's rumours of a 2 and a 3, 3 and a 4 as well. Yeah, like they're like, right, let's just get it.
It's hard not to draw parallels with Bosch, which is another long-running crime series by Michael Connelly, which they got 7 series out of, and done a spin-off series, and I suspect they are going to replace one with the other, and make Lee Child a much richer man.
Yeah, and you know, we'll get into it, but there's a big difference between the films and the TV series. But I'm glad it's doing well. And I think they're not. I don't think they're doing them in a chronological order, although the books aren't in a chronological. Well, they are in a chronological order, kind of. Yeah. It jumps around a bit, so it doesn't matter. There's only 2 or 3 books that link into each other, but the rest of them you can read anyway.
So how did you find the series? Or what made you start reading it? Or how far ago even, Holly, did you start reading them? Because obviously if you're that far in, this has been a long-term project.
So, yeah, it's taken me 10 years to get to the book that I'm up to. And I'm a bit conscious of just that's all I read. So I do try and vary it with other bits and bobs. And it was, about 10 years ago, I was going on honeymoon, wanted something to read because I tend to read on my Kindle because it's a bit easier, which now I understand why, because of my dyslexia and different things. I can change the font and stuff. Yeah. And they, a friend of mine that I worked with at the time just said, "Oh, give this a go. Give Jack Reacher a go." And then someone else mentioned it as well. And I was like, okay, yeah, let's give it a go. So started with the first book. I think I may have started just before I went on honeymoon, and then went to the second one, or I ended up starting the second one while I was on my honeymoon. And then, so yeah, that was about 10 years ago. But I think I started reading them and then went from there.
Did it instantly grab you?
Yeah. The first one took me a little bit of time to kind of get into a little bit. But it did, after a few chapters, I struggled to put it down, and we're off to the races. And yeah, they were just
It's
good.
an interesting read because I finished Kill and Floor not that long ago, which obviously is the first series, or is the first TV adaptation series. It's very much
Yeah,
taken
it's
of
the first
that.
book,
Indeed, yeah, indeed.
yeah.
I found the first couple of chapters in this. I know it's a long time since you read them. It's written kind of funny because it's written in that kind of procedural, kind of almost spectrumy way that Reacher thinks. Of, you know, man walks in door, man looks to the left, man looks right, waits 2 seconds, goes and sits down, bum first. You know, it's very procedural and how it goes, and it kind of drifts away from that, I think, after a while, because I think he set up the character, you know, as being, this is who he is. You know, you get a lot of who he is, what way he thinks, and maybe it goes to explain some of his other, you know, personality traits. But from that, you know, you don't have to spell it out for people, and I do like that part of it.
Yes, yeah, there are some bits where I don't know whether it's Lee Child flexing, and if a lot of other authors do this, but there is a lot in it where he explains a lot, and then you can tell that Lee Child's probably visited somewhere in the US or whatever, and it just goes into, for me, a little bit too much detail.
Yeah.
At times, and I'm like, I don't care what colour the grate is on the floor or whatever. So kind of skim through some of those bits, but it doesn't take anything away from the series, and he does adapt his reading as he goes through. So I'm reading them in release order. There is a way that you can read them from. There are ones where he's in the military as a military police officer, and then obviously he goes to be, I guess, almost like a freelance help. Help almost.
He's like the littlest hobo. I think, you know, as far as, you know, he travels from town to town, he travels from place to place, and, you know, he lays his head there for a while, solves a problem, and then is on his way again.
Yeah, and he doesn't like to be anywhere for too long, and he gets a lot of flack for the fact that he is a hobo, or, you know, just a man with no address. And he's like, but I spent ages of because he's a military child as well. He grew up on military bases and things like that. So he's used to kind of almost being almost at one place, but traveling around with the military wherever his dad went, and then he went. And he just was like, well, I can go see the world now. So
yeah, he has no fixed abode. I mean, it's one of the nice things, I suppose, about that life. If you didn't grow up anywhere and don't have an attachment to one place, then you're not tied to one place either. And it's like, you know, some of us are getting a bit older and thinking, God, that whole period of my life might be gone. That ability to do that might be gone, and wouldn't that have been nice to do? So you kind of, I think you kind of live vicariously through his change in location, and, you know, the people that he meets, and, you know, he's an interesting character because he doesn't really have people skills.
No, he doesn't. No,
you know, he's not.
He kind of does a little bit, but yeah, he's not. He's just very focused. He's very military, and he sees everything, not necessarily in black and white, but almost like in the Matrix code. And he's like, look, like when he's surrounded by a few guys, and he's like, right, I'm going to hit you first, and then I'm going to hit you, and you three are going to run away. And they're like, no, and then you know, it happens because, you know, he is, what is he, 6'4", 5", something like that.
Yeah.
So 6'5", and he is built like a brick shit house.
Yeah.
Which is where the films with Tom Cruise kind of didn't quite hit the mark.
Yeah.
Thankfully, his acting, I think, made up for it. But yeah, whereas with Alan, he's, you know, if anybody's not seen the Jack Reacher series and you've seen not Teen Titans, but Titans on Netflix, and he's been in a few other bits, he is a unit.
He is. Mess with him. He is somebody, when he walks into the room, heads turn and go, shit, there is a physically imposing man, and I wouldn't really want to mess with him.
Yeah, and that's what Jack Reacher is in the books.
Yeah.
He is meant to be, you know, he can disappear, which I think gives him that extra kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, but just weird element to him that someone of that size can just Houdini out of somewhere and nobody can find him. But it's like 6'5" and, you know,
the hoodie up
so many feet
and
across.
Yeah, put the hoodie up and you can blend into nothing or be a nothing character until you draw attention to yourself and all those things. But I think it's interesting because he is very much an anti-hero. You know, he's not a saint. He's certainly not somebody that plays by the rules all the time. He steps outside that and has the reader's support.
Yeah, absolutely. And he, like you say, he kind of gets a job done, but also doesn't like it if someone's being taken advantage of. or something's going down that shouldn't happen. And basically, I think it comes ultimately down to he doesn't like bullies.
Yeah.
Therefore, no, you're not doing that. And that was explained a little bit in the first TV series as well, about him and his brother getting bullied, and he's like, no, I'm not going to take that. And that's how they kind of had their relationship. But it's very much kind of a little bit like a damsel in distress, but sometimes he doesn't realise that. And sometimes he's victimised, which I guess is how America can still be with their, various states and villages and stuff where you're not from around here, leave. Yeah. Even though he is American.
We've got local rules. There's a way we do things around here, and you're supposed to fit in here. And of course, he doesn't care about that. He is, in old style terms, I would say he's like an arbiter of justice. He's going to mete out what he sees as the right thing, the right way to do, and the rules really don't matter to a certain degree, which I think is kind of odd because he is from a military family and a military background, and there's a code that you must follow. Yeah, but he does the right thing. Yeah.
Because there's a bit in one of the books where a lady that ends up replacing him down the line as the military police sergeant or captain or whatever he is, and he's talking to her on the phone. He says, "Oh, that dent in the desk. Yeah, that's your predecessor that tried to sack me or whatever." I slammed his head into the desk, and things like that. So he has got a bit of a, not necessarily anger problem, but he definitely knows when to hit someone and when not. And one of the interesting books that I've recently read is where he goes to a place called Mother's Rest.
Right.
And all he wants to do while he's there, he's not looking for trouble. He just walked around and said, "Why is it called Mother's Rest?" And people are like, "Well, who are you? Get out." And he's like, "Yeah, but it's just a weird name town. I'm interested. I'm traveling around he does go outside the US, but he's traveling around. He's come across this weird place. He's like, oh, I'll go there." And then people don't want to tell him, and it's because there's other things happening in the background, whether it's drug dealing or something like that, and they get very cagey, and he's like, "No, there's something else happening here," and he still wants to know why it's called Mother's Rest.
You talk about the fact that Lee Child does this flexing thing, which kind of builds out the bulk of the books, I suppose to say, makes them a bit thicker. I often wonder this with long run series, and there's a couple that I read, like I read Jim Butcher's Dresden Files, for instance, which is another long running series that he's planning, I think, for 28 books or something like that. He's in 17 or 18 at the moment.
Yeah.
But there are definite parts of that I think are problematic, right? There's a male gaze problem in general in main characters. And I often wonder if he does it on purpose, if it was intentionally, or whether, because he started such a long time ago, that's what he did. As an author, how do you keep your interest in? You've got to find something for yourself. Otherwise, I just think the general quality of the books would go down.
Yeah. And like you say, it needs that kind of, especially when you're reading it or you're reading about somewhere that maybe you would never really go to.
Yeah.
Like if it's New York or something like that, quite a few people have been there, or the touristy parts of America. But I guess if you're going somewhere that is random and he's done his homework, so then he kind of needs to explain the environment and what it's like, because everywhere is different. Even in just a few miles driving around the UK, the accents change.
Well,
we're not that far apart. 1,000 miles or something like that, and it's almost a different world.
The UK is a great example because political beliefs, accents, ways of life, things that are important change by a stretch of 20 or 30 miles in the UK. Like, it's absolutely insane how things can be so incredibly different because of just your location and where you're brought up and what way you'll think and all of that kind of stuff. And I think especially America's such a massive place, and that we, unless you live there or you have access to people there, and the internet's wonderful for that, of course, you don't really get a sense of what that is until you get the broader spectrum. You might hear lots of people from New York, the major cities, but the people that live in Midwest or the people that live down deep south or otherwise, your access to those people is limited to essentially a couple of movies, the odd TV show, the odd book, and you usually get an extreme version of that caricature in all of those things.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, and like you say, it's just mad that how condensed it is, basically. In the UK, and I guess accents even in Ireland, between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, will change, and different dialects and whatnot. But obviously in America it's like that, but on a bigger scale, so therefore it's more more stretched out. But yeah, I think sometimes he does go into a little bit too much detail, but you can kind of skim it. You don't have to read it in too much detail, but you can definitely tell he knows his stuff, especially with weapons and military and things like that. And it's the more recent books he's started to hand the reins over to his brother Andrew as well. So it's going over to his brother at some point.
Yeah, it's one of the things I often think about portrayals of Northern Irish people, because I don't know if you'd seen it, The Tourist, which was the one that Jimmy Dornan was in. TV show. It was a HBO BBC production where he's in the outback in Australia. Okay. That was about the first depiction I can remember of a Northern Irish person that wasn't a terrorist. You know, the terrorist wasn't part of who they were or who they had to be or their legacy. You know, the reformed terrorist or something. You know, depictions of that in screen are just not quite the same.
Yeah, and like you say, it's you can almost guarantee if you're watching a film and someone's got an Irish accent or a Russian accent or Indeed. Something like that, they're the bad guy.
Yeah, but that's how
it used
exactly
to be. It's
right.
not so much now, thank God.
Yeah,
but,
the Russian guy with the Russian accent that appeared in the long overcoat was never the good guy. Oh dear. So the series itself, I like, right? I've only read the first book and, you know, seen a couple of the movies, so that the take pieces from it otherwise. Are there narrative changes, you know, like wholesale changes or events that happen across the 20 odd books that you've read that change the direction of the series or change the impetus or change, you know, or is it very much another story, new location with slight progression of the character?
Yeah, so one of the things that has changed throughout the books is technology.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think he started writing them or at least they're based in the 80s. And obviously Jack Reach hasn't really aged much, but there are times now where he's starting to use a mobile phone and things like that, and he needs a passport to get money out of an ATM and things like that, because he was using something like the Western Union, something like that, to get his pension. And he's very much kept him that there is technology there, but he's no good at it. He doesn't use it. He's, you know, don't need technology. But some of the books do change quite a bit. So the ones in the military, so where he's actually military police, I definitely recommend reading, because they're more of a detective story. So because he is military police, something happens, and it could be that a soldier's wound up dead in the corner of a nightclub, and he's like, well, how's that happened? That's not normal. And he can look at things and go, yeah, this isn't right, and he kind of goes on a bit of a detective kind of story.
Yeah,
and they're good fun. And the books do change as well in terms of what the crime is. I think that's the underpinning part of the book, which does kind of change how narrative works. So sometimes it is kind of, you've got some guys that have got like guns and all this, that and the other, and he's just there to take them down. And then other times he's trying to figure out what is actually going on, because he knows something's happening but nobody will tell him. And then there's times where he keeps being escorted out of certain states or over the border, and he comes back and has to find his way in, and the way he takes them down and gets weapons, and so they do change, and also how he is with women as well. So the first half a dozen books or so, I was going to say a bit of a James Bond, but he's not a womanizer. But a few things that will normally happen in a book is he'll have a few beers, he'll get into a few fights and win the lady. If there's a lady in the book, whether it's someone he's helping out or a fellow police officer and things like that, they'll end up together for a little bit. But that's starting to kind of lean out of the books a little bit. It's still there sometimes. And I think Lee Child might have just been a bit conscious of him maybe being a bit of a womanizer or something like that.
Yeah, well, what it does is it creates this thing that women have to be objects of, you know, control, you know, in some way. And, you know, certainly 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s, that was very much an expected, I think, storyline trope that had to nearly every Hollywood film had to have a romance in it, or otherwise, and the woman there would fall for the lead man every single time. It was nearly something that was a tick box, had to be in all things. Yeah. And I think, especially more recently, there's been a welcome move away from the fact that women are objectified in that way, and actually they can just be characters in their own right. You've got
You've got Neely, who's in the TV show.
Yes.
And she pops up in the books a few times. She's one of the, I won't say a regular character, but she does pop up if he needs a bit of help.
Yeah.
And different things, and she kicks ass, like,
Yeah.
and tells him how it is, and they very much play off each other, and different things. But then he also changes his direction with her as well, in terms of they are just more good mates rather than he doesn't see any affection to her, and different things. But yeah, he very much changes his approach depending on the circumstance, which is really nice. And like I say, some of the military ones are very much more of a detective rather than just stumbling upon an issue.
Yeah, like if I think of other series that I've read similar, like I would have read the Case Carpetta by Patricia Cornwell, who's a forensic pathologist, right?
Yeah, my wife reads a lot of them.
So I read a lot of them. I can't read anymore because at a certain point you see the plot by numbers kind of part of it, and a lot of them have, and forensic crime dramas often fall in this of having the MacGuffin that it's solved by this one thing rather than a natural progression. You get to a point of the book and you get the key piece of evidence that comes back from the lab that basically there's your MacGuffin to tell you who the bad person is or who the thing is, and at a certain point you're waiting for it when you're reading the books. And you're going, right, when's this going to come? Whereas Reacher, I've only read one book, but it's the same with the Michael Connelly Boss series as well. There's very much a process that goes through. You chase the evidence to all the ends, you come up against a couple of dead ends, you get a couple of red herrings as you'd expect, but actually the outcome makes sense from the world of the setup. You know, there's been enough mistakes left behind by people who perpetrated the crime or otherwise to the point where you go, right, this is what's going on here. And that's where the fun comes from novels, is when you're trying to work out what actually happened here.
The nice bits with the Jack Reacher books, at least, is that he always seems to be 3 or 4 steps ahead.
Yes.
And normally a bit ahead of the reader. And there'll be a dialogue somewhere where someone will ask him something and he'll just go, I think I know what's happening, or where it's at, or who's doing it, but I need to confirm it first. And then you're like, oh, who is that then? And there are twists in the book as well, where it does try and lead you down a path, and then it's like, actually, no, it was who you was thinking, or it wasn't at all. And yeah, they're good at doing that.
Yeah, that's cool. See, like, for all of the clever plotting and stuff that you've got there, Ollie, I think it's fair to say that the calling card of the series is the fact that you've got this big, massive guy with the ability to pummel people into submission with one punch, and to systematically do it, to kind of talk himself through, right, we're going to do, as you described before, I'm going to hit him, then I'm going to move to him.
It's very much, if anybody's seen the Sherlock Holmes films with Robert Downey Jr., where he kind of plots out what he's going to do, and the way the books are written as well, is he knows his own strength most of the time. And it's, if he wants to kill someone, he knows where to punch from his military training, and because of his size, he knows where to punch them and how hard to punch them as well. And he also knows that if he, he can restrain himself, a little bit like a martial arts training, that if he restrains himself so much, it'll either knock them out, just give them a bloody nose, or kill them. And there are times where he gets surrounded, and he does get a fair kicking every now and again, but he knows how to lure someone in as well. And the fights go into quite a lot of detail, but they kind of get the adrenaline going as well. And there's one particular fight in one of the early books where it's dark, but it's like in a like a circle, and there's a bit of light, but not as well. And they're trying to fight each other basically blindfolded almost, because of how dark it is. And he's having to listen to where he is and punch him in a certain way and do things to people just to disable them, because he doesn't go out his way to be fair with the books, he's killed a lot of people.
I was going to say, there are certain occasions, like that one in Killing Floor is the bit where they go to the house and he's waiting for them in the house, and he's going there with a different intent than just to survive at that stage. It's very much about, right, let's take these people out. And again, incredibly systematically, in the dark, using the senses. I think that's one of the things that's really nice, like you've just said. He uses the lack of ability of other people's senses to his advantage because of his training and all of those things that he has, So
and for just being a military police officer as well, he did do a bit of army as well, but then he just went into military police. So he has to be able to be skilled enough to beat up and apprehend other people that are military trained. So he has almost have to be, and I think one of the books it does go into this as well, that he has to be at that extra level, because if not, what's the point in having the police that can take, the people that are doing wrong and stuff. So, but yeah, he does injure, kill, and harm a lot of people. Sometimes it could just be a backhander to someone just to say no. Sometimes he's breaking legs and arms and all sorts. And he does use guns. He knows how to use them, but it's more physical violence, I think, with him because of his size. He doesn't need to use weapons.
It's a weird thing because I'm a complete and utter pacifist, like in general, mainly because I can't fight, right? And I've had lots of people, because I am quite a tall guy, nearly 6'3" myself, the people are intimidated by my size, even though, like, honestly, I don't know what you're worried about. But yet, there's something really enjoyable about reading, watching, seeing that kind of extreme violence in books or in popular culture. It's like a catharsis or something that you release and go.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit different. Not that I get into fights at all.
Yeah.
I enjoy it in a way that I train martial arts.
Yeah.
I've done karate, I've done taekwondo, and I'm now training in Japanese jiu-jitsu, which is basically what the samurais used to train in. However, we're starting with if they were unarmed.
Okay.
So normally, if you're training to be a samurai, you train with all the weapons first, and then you do the unarmed stuff. Whereas because it's a little bit Western, we're doing that kind of stuff first to be able to defend ourselves against knives and things like that. And I really enjoy it, but then I'm seeing in films like John Wick and different things, and I'm like, oh, that's that move and that's that, and it's just what amazes me with it. Not to completely go off topic, but it's just how little you need to do to someone to hurt them.
Yeah, that's
to defend yourself, and it's amazing. But yeah, so those bits, I'm like, oh, yes, like you say, it gets your adrenaline pumping reading it, and kind of living through them as what they're doing, because they do go into a lot of detail about. He can hear someone or he can feel the breathing, and he's waiting for them to get into a certain position, and then he'll just grab them and do this, and they're down, and it's fun.
It's funny because, like, I think about this an awful lot, especially when I go back and watch things like 80s horrors movies, because, like, I have a daughter now who's 14 that's really starting to get into certain types of films that she likes. That stage with I can't watch it but I can't not watch it kind of thing. So we'll watch something like The Fly the other day, which I had picked for her to watch, and it was like great seeing their reaction. But I think the bit that I didn't even realize when I was that young watching it is that the extreme violence, the extreme gore, all of those things that are kind of outside what I'd say acceptable use in society, they're nearly always played for fun. The combat is fun. How creative can you be? It's nearly like a form of art in that, right, what's a creative way I can kill this person, injure this person, maim this person, and you're not meant to take it as violent. Yeah, well, do you know what I mean? As being brutal.
I think Jackie Chan is the pinnacle of that.
Exactly.
He's a very, an incredible martial artist and trained with Bruce Lee, and he's actually at Enter the Dragon in the background and stuff. But he does it in more of a comedic way, where it is fun and it's fighting and it is quite violent at times, especially in Police Story, where he's driving through so many planes of glass and doing all the stunts himself and different things. But it's done in a fun way to an extent. But then you start, as we've matured in an audience, we then get things like the Bourne films and the most recent run of James Bond, where they are more gritty, in your face, and not so flouncy, shall we say, in Hollywood. It is more block, bang, you down kind of thing, rather than trading blocks and punches, because not everyone's trained.
But that's true. But it's interesting that you bring up Bourne and Bond, and we're getting totally off topic, but I think in general it kind of fits the thing, because not only did they change the combat style, which was very much the block arm, you kind of think they changed how all those things were shot, because it all went very shaky cam, all very handheld, so you got right up close and in the face of the action, so you could feel the impact of the block, because that kind of thing shot from further away. It's technical, but never that impressive physically, you know what I mean? Whereas if you get really right up in somebody's grill, they're like, right, okay, this is
and
this
even
is
like
cool.
the John Wick films, they are, I think that's the most recent, not so much shaky cam, but very violent.
But there's a balletic nature to John Wick as well. It's very much like a dance. I often find when I watch those, and I'm amazed that I love the John Wick movies as much as I do, because they are brutal from start to finish, especially the first one for being so short. They're brutal.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But like they say, there's like a poetry or a beauty or an art to how he goes about systematically taking down hundreds of people in minutes. And I think the violent side, that escapism or that bit where you're representing something that is not part of your life, and whether you're training or trained in martial arts or it's as far from your personality as it is in my case, you still can get a lot of joy and a lot of fun out of it.
That's why you watch films and you read books. Is that escapism? I love the Harry Potter series.
Yeah.
And I'd never it doesn't even exist, does it? As far as we're aware, being able to do yes, people could do magic tricks with cards and stuff, but you can't cast spells and different things. And it's that escapism that, and even playing video games and stuff like that, it's a way that you can then just. I love my racing games. I've got a wheel and I get as close to reality as I can because that's what I could afford to do as well. It's just being able to live outside of your bounds without having to spend loads of money or do training or get arrested.
And I think we take it for granted sometimes because it's only, again, I've got a couple of younger kids coming through, they're getting to an age now, and they look at some of the things that I consume as part of entertainment. And like, say I remember many years ago playing Assassin's Creed, and one of my children coming in, maybe about 7 or 8, and going, "And can you go anywhere in that world?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "And you can go? Can you go up the top of that building?" And I was like, "Yeah." So you go at the top building, and you can just see the wow on their face, going,
"Yeah,
this is such a cool concept that I can explore a world that's not reality, and that isn't a thing." And it doesn't matter about any of the combat or the story parts. It's just the freedom and the kind of thing to say I could actually put myself in that character's shoes and then decide I'm going to go that way, which is the beauty of those games, Skyrim, all of those things where you're free to explore and then I'm going to do things how I want to do and see the world and butcher a couple of hundred people along the way.
Yeah, and even in the most recent games as well, they've added more of an educational piece to them as well, where you can, especially the one in Egypt,
the Origins, the virtual tour that they did,
yeah, they've added those in as well, which is really good to give you a bit of history and whatnot.
Yeah, which kind of links back a little bit to Reacher and his tour around America, and finding out and seeing the differences and the similarities between different parts of America and kind of giving you an insight into what the people are like, what the places are like, and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, interesting series, like I say, and I'm wondering, I'm unsure whether to keep reading myself, Ali, to be honest, because I find these kind of crime procedural kind of things are done so well in TV and movie. They are set in reality, so they can tell those stories within that context very well. Whereas there's some kind of books and series like Harry Potter that can live better in your head because it sits outside reality in some ways. You can. There's a majesty to how we perceive those worlds.
The way cinema has changed as well, and not necessarily just cinema, but the way TV's changed more than anything from Game of Thrones and different things that we were just talking about off camera. But I think now the Harry Potter series, as much as I love the films, and they've got their issues because books that even like Lord of the Rings that are absolutely massive, you can't cram all that into a film. Probably will suit TV shows better. And I think that's why they are booming so much, and you're getting a lot of big actors that are doing movies and TV, whereas before it's right, I'm done with TV, I'm a movie star now. Whereas now you're just an actor and you go on and do whatever you want to do, and you turn up in this and you turn up in that, and next thing you're on the big screen. And I think books are better to an extent for TV because you get to add the extra detail and things that fans of the series will want. Now if it's a series of books that's only had 2 or 3 in it, and you put it into a film, it's not too bad. But when it's something like Jack Reacher that's got such a big following as well, 20-something books, you need that detail because your core fan base probably going to rip you apart if you miss certain details out. And I've read a lot of books that are based on films. Sometimes they're better, sometimes they're not. And I've ranted about those on the podcast and things. But it's like Steve Batman or Stephen King that did Running Man. Nothing like that film. Love the film. But the book is nothing like it at all. But it's an inspiration.
I've talked about this a little bit because I did actually the comparison between The Shining, for instance, and I do think actually in this case, The Shining captures the mood better than the book, right? I think it's one of the rare occasions where I think, but it is slightly different focuses, but they're best as like companions for each other.
Yeah.
It's
same with Ready Player One.
Yeah, that's true.
Because that's a stunning book, and it is a guy that's basically a love letter to the 80s.
That's right.
But obviously they've had to modernise it for the current audience, so they've obviously got bits of Minecraft in it and things like that where people were kicking off. But I think the film worked better than the book, because unless you know Gallagher and all those different games that they're playing, then you won't really get it. Whereas obviously because they modernised it and it's more of a race at the start rather than being a dungeon crawler, it works better.
Yeah, and
slaughtered for that, but
well, but I can see that, because like it's different me reading Ready Player One than if my kids read Ready Player One, the book, they're just not going to get any of it. Really, they're not really going to get the references. They're not going to make sense. They'll be able to follow along. It's not that they'll be lost, but actually what the core, the beauty, or the nostalgia bit that's really hitting them will be lost on them. Whereas they can watch, regardless of what it is, they can watch and follow along with what kind of world they're going on, whether they're aware of what the world is built on and tales or otherwise. Like the idea that my kids would know what a text adventure is, even in its own right, I think would be quite alien to them, Yeah,
and probably boring.
And probably very boring. Like, why would you waste your time on that kind of media? Otherwise,
but where technology was at the time. That was brilliant.
That's true. I know, we loved it, but you filled in the gaps yourself, and I think that imagination part is one of the bits that, for as good as TV and movies can be, they'll never reach the possibilities of what your mind could create.
Yeah, absolutely. And the weird thing is, I find as well when you're reading books is, and I don't know if this has happened to yourself, it might just be me, but because I fall asleep quite easily reading a book, because I tend to read at night.
Yeah.
And then, unless my Kindle hits me in the face and wakes me up, but I end up kind of carrying on reading the book.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, hang on, no, that's not just happened. Yeah, and you kind of like carry on the story.
It is. I think that bit is fascinating. There's how these little stories get stored away in our brain, maybe to follow on directly from what you've been doing, or maybe sometime later on.
Yeah.
I remember having a very vivid dream one day. I loved the TV series Alias, right?
Yep.
Hadn't seen it for about 10 years, and then one night, very vividly, and I remember no dreams, just like everybody else in the world, I was in an episode of Alias. It was the most awesome dream I have ever had in my entire life, and it wasn't. There was nothing romantic about it. It wasn't that kind of dream, in case anybody's wondering.
Yeah.
It was very much I existed in that world, and it wasn't the story from the TV series. It was new and imagined, and my brain had invented it, and it was just like, this is epic, absolutely epic, better than any movie, better than any. I was actually in it and existing in it. Oh. There's some way we could tap into that, that part of the brain, just, in some way you'd be a very, very rich man. But like you talked about the fact that, we've got a couple of movies here. I think it's fair to say the reaction to them is not always warm.
No, I think the films themselves, so you've got One Shot, which is the first one, and then you've got Never Go Back, and both starring Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
And I think they are good films. I enjoyed them, but I think the reason why they were not as highly rated is because, like everyone, you go to the original source.
Yes, indeed.
And then when you see that he's 6'5", built like a brick shithouse, and then you've got Tom Cruise who's barely over 5 foot. Granted, he is ripped, but I think if he wasn't such a good actor, I think they would have struggled with those films. But because he could do that 100-yard stare quite well, because he's done quite a lot of different military films and action films, so he could do the physical stuff, and he was doing his own stunts as well. They worked. I still enjoy them. I've got them.
I think they're fine. There's just not much reacher about them. You know what I mean? They are not differentiated from, say, a Bourne. They're not differentiated from one of those, like James Patterson even kind of things, where you'd have a central protagonist. The one bit that I think that really works, I think in the books, it's in One Shot, isn't it? It's where he's at the scene in the bar at the start, where he dissects and analyzes the situation. He works out, he gets outside, he gives them a chance to say, look, you need to walk away, this is your last chance. I think that bit feels very Reacher. I think a lot of the rest of it doesn't really differentiate itself, other than being, he's smart, He's a smart guy who was in the military.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I agree with you on that one. That that is a pinnacle Reacher scene.
Yeah.
And there's a few other bits where he goes up to the I think his name's Sandy or something like that.
Yeah.
And he says, "These are your car keys. I'm not stealing your car. I'm borrowing your car. Do we agree?" And he went, "Yeah." And then they're like, it's certain things like that where he's saying, "Look, no, I'm borrowing the car and different things to go after Jeb," and but like you say, they're not very Reachery.
Yeah,
they're
they're
more
like
about
touch
the story than him.
They're like touch parts of his and his character. Whereas if you compare it to the TV series, the first thing you see in that thing is this guy is fucking huge to a level that nobody else in the world around him is comparable.
Yeah, and he's put a lot of effort into it, and I've seen a few behind the scenes things, and he's read the books, and really got into it. And I think I might be mistaken, but I'm not sure if he actually at the time he auditioned or at least tried to get an audition for the films. And didn't get there because he wasn't that well known at the time. Yeah. Not that he's massively well known now, but he's obviously after this is getting there.
TV invents its own stars. I think people will engage with a long running TV series and take in, and like I don't think there's any about it. I think he's a fucking superstar now. I think he so perfectly nails this.
Well, he's in the next Fast and Furious film, so what can you say?
Yeah. That's it.
But I know the TV show got a bit of. So I'm on a few Facebook groups and different things to talk about the books, and everyone's like, "Yeah, but he's saying too much," and I'm like, "Yeah, but if he didn't say anything, it'd be a bit of a crap TV show. He's got to, they've got to take that away because in the book again, they describe what's happening around him.
That's right.
And that fills it up. And if you've just got the camera panning and Jack Reacher's there, and one of the famous lines in the books is, "Jack Reacher said nothing."
Yes.
Or Reacher said nothing. Yes, he could say nothing and just look at someone, but he can't do that for an entire, 8-episode series.
But you don't get the beauty of internal monologue that you do in books. So it's not that he's silent in the books.
Yeah.
We hear or read his thoughts. We hear what he's thinking and all that kind of stuff. Whereas in the TV series, that never comes across in any way, shape, or form. But it's endlessly fascinating to me how you can put a TV series like that together on the backdrop of two films that I think it's fair to say that the people who are fans of the show or the books didn't really buy into to the same degree. They may like the books, but they're like they're not Reacher. And then you have to establish within an episode, this is very different. This is the Reacher that you know, and this is what it's going to be like.
Yeah, because there's one I think it's fairly early on where he's stood in the town hall and he's just towards the back, and he's like, "Well, Sasquatch came here and nobody ever like the way they refer to him, and nobody's ever died until he turned up," and things like that. And the good thing is that, and I think you mentioned this in your review of the book, is that it is very, there's not much they've cut out of the book compared to the TV show, which is really good and says something about what they managed to bring in.
That's right.
The only thing that does worry me about the future of the TV show is if they try and put some characters in the TV show that, because each book is its own, apart from a few military personnel. So Neil is in and out of it, and a few other military people. He basically moves from town to town, and it's a completely different cast.
Yeah, that's the bit that I look at it and go, people are going to be expecting to see Roscoe and people like that back, and the temptation will be to put them back and carry them as through
just
points.
Got to resist it.
It's just got to be its own thing. I think they showed that if they do the story and tell the story well, the characters are neither hidden. He is the characters.
There's no reason why they couldn't put Neely in.
Yeah.
He could have a phone call with her and
returning cast. Yeah.
But everyone else has kind of just got to, right, that's that done. Move on to the next one.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I am excited about the rest of the TV series because I think it's for a show that's about a violent man, they're smart. I think there's an intelligence to that's what makes it interesting, on a moment-to-moment basis, and then it's punctuated by these moments of extreme violence or things like that. So
while we're on TV shows, I know we're talking about Jack Reacher, but have you read watched any of the Peter James TV shows that are on ITV?
Such as?
So it's they're called Dead Something.
Right. Okay. So that
I haven't. Peter James. My wife long story short, my wife got bought some books for Christmas a few years back from my
Okay.
mum and dad, and it was a collection, random collection, but they all had "dead" in the title.
Right.
And all of his books say "dead" something, like "dead gorgeous" or
It's dead simple.
things
I'm
like
looking
that.
at some now. Or
Yes,
yeah.
yeah, "dead simple" and all that. And my wife's read all of them, and she was waiting for the next one to be released. We've actually seen a stage show of one of the books as well, and ITV have taken it and done feature lengths, so they're like an hour and a half, 2 hours long, and they're really good. But they have got a reoccurring cast because it's all based in Brighton in the UK, and they are detective stories. And he's not a down and out cop, but he's got his issues, and his wife
This is Grace
died,
we're
went
talking
missing.
about, isn't it?
Roy Grace, yeah.
Yes. So I did watch the first series, Roy Grace. I did.
Yeah, and they're really good, really, really good. But that's got a nice recurring cast as well, and they've had to dub down some of the characters because one of them's a bit risque. But
Yeah, well, it's going on at 9 o'clock on Sunday night,
Yeah.
in the UK, which is like, prime time sanitized.
Yeah,
Everything
yeah.
has to be as straight as it can be. The only thing that ventures outside is probably Line of Duty, where they kind of push the envelope a little bit, but
yeah,
yeah.
So they're really good as well. If anybody's into that kind of
And John Sims,
stuff, and
incredible. I really like John Sims.
yeah, they did well to get him in that.
Yeah, casting always makes a big difference, as we've just been discussing. The thing that strikes me about certainly Killing Floor, right, and if I'm thinking about things that are akin to it, this will be an obscure one because it's a podcast series. Okay, so have you ever listened to? Well, have you ever listened to the podcast series Serial?
No,
Oh, well, Serial's very famous. It tells the story of a murder of a young woman in Baltimore, right? That 15-year-old Korean girl, right? It was incredibly successful. In fact, it was so successful that they've tried to replicate it a number of times to not as much success. But
Right.
one of the creators of the people that did that, they created another show called Shit Town. It's actually S star 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 town, is what they call it. And what happened was somebody contacted the person that was investigating the murder of that young girl to say, look, there was a death here in this town, and we think it was the rich family's son that did it. But because they're so powerful in the microcosm of like Alabama or wherever else it was, deep South America, nobody will investigate it because the local
Too
sheriffs
powerful.
and all are too powerful. So it's kind of got this crossover with Killing Floor certainly, but really what the podcast series is about is explaining the culture and the way that those communities are set up and the individuals and the characters that are in it. And when I was reading Killing Floor, I was very much, oh, this reminds me of this, because while there's an event and there's a story to tell and thing, the beauty of this is actually getting to know the people and the lifestyles that are outside my own.
Yeah.
And what I experience, and that's the first thing that I would say I would recommend from watching both the TV series and reading the book. There's something that somebody can stick on their podcast player of choice on their phone or otherwise and make their way through it. But 6 or 7 episodes, it's fascinating because it doesn't end up where you think it's gonna go.
Yeah.
You just don't know where that's gonna end up or otherwise. So yeah, that'd be my first real recommendation based on that. You anything else?
I've got a few book recommendations for you. If
Oh,
anybody wants
nice.
to get into the Jack Reacher series. So obviously you got to start with Killing Floor.
Yeah.
Where it all started. And the beauty, like we said at the start of the podcast, at the start of this video, is that you don't have to read them in order. There are a few that do link into each other, around 61 hours.
Okay.
There's although you can read them out of order, but it kind of moves on to the next town, but he's carrying some of the injuries and things like that, and I think someone's trying to chase him as well. But you can read them out of order. So,
Okay.
but you have to read Killing Floor, where it started, where the TV series is based on. Then you've got Without Fail, which is where he gets contacted to help protect the president.
Okay.
Which is a
Yeah.
different take on things.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Lee Child's ever been to any of the like the government buildings, but
Okay.
he explains them in a lot of detail. And it's quite interesting about how easily you could get lost around there. So there's that one. And then 2 more. You've got The Enemy, which is from his army days,
Okay.
which is the detective kind of aspect.
I like the sound of that. Yeah, that seems to
different
be.
things. And then the next one that I've got actually two looking at my notes, but so you've got Bad Luck and Trouble, which is where he's with a group of friends.
Okay.
I think Neil is involved in that, and that's what the next series is based on.
Oh, right.
So
That's the next TV series, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, and what happens in that? Not to spoil anything, but there's a code within either his friends or within the military, and someone leaves a military paper on a bus that he's on.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's an ad in there, which is basically, in a lesser words, Jack Reacher contact us.
Yeah.
They need his help with something. And then finally, one of the more recent ones that I've just read is called Gone Tomorrow, which is actually about suicide bombers.
Oh, right. Okay.
And it's quite interesting about how he profiles them, and he goes into detail about this person's. He's sat on in the tube or in the subway in America, and this woman is showing all signs that she's about to blow something up. And I'll leave it there. But it's very interesting because he's like, there's like, I think there's like 5 or 6 different traits that a suicide bomber would show. Like being a bit sweaty and twitching and things like that. And yeah, it goes from there.
Oh, that reminds me of like when you watch a lot of something like Criminal Minds. Do you ever watch Criminal Minds? Right?
Yeah.
And you watch a lot of that, and they go into profiling the types of people that commit certain crimes, and obviously you learn a lot, I think, through watching multiple series of that. And then you go and watch some film from the 80s, and they reveal the killer, and you go, I turn that shit off. There's no way that person would have committed that crime. It ruins an awful lot of other things that you'll go to watch. It's just not good enough to tell it was the character you weren't thinking of that killed them. They had to have a profile. They had to have an idea of who they were and what they were.
Yeah,
I think that bit's quite cool. Excellent one. I like that was really interesting. We'll just finish off by kind of talking about your general theme books that you've talked to. Obviously, a couple of them. Harry Potter. Maybe talk about your all-time favorites. Like I say, you've mentioned a couple of them there. The things that you consider to be important books for you that you've read.
Yeah, so obviously we've mentioned Ready Player One and Harry Potter series and things like that. I really enjoyed. It's like a young adult one, but it's called The Loop by Ben Oliver.
Okay, yeah.
Which is a very interesting, a little bit like Maze Runner, but not. And basically, it's about these children that are put in prison. It's like set in the future, like a dystopian kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they are put in prison, but they're all in their own little box, and they have their own little outdoor space, and they don't see anyone. They can hear each other and talk to each other. Bit hard to go into too much detail without revealing anything. But it's a series of 3 books. I don't know if there's any more to come, and it's how different things happen. I've not read the second one, but the first one was really good once you get into it, because it's all kind of like technology driven as well.
Yeah.
So it's all kind of, it's like sci-fi kind of, everything's automated and whatnot, and then something happens, and it's what happens from there.
And you said it's like young adultish. Is it got a younger protagonist in it?
Yeah, he's like mid to late teens.
Aye.
It might be like 14 or something like that, 14, 15. And one of the things is that in the prison, someone knows his name, and he doesn't even know who it is because he's a few cells down, but he keeps shouting his name whenever they go out for their morning exercise outside. And it's an interesting read, and he's a fairly new author from what I gather as well.
Yeah.
I know you're into your fantasy.
Yes.
And you love your fantasy books. So one of them is Crimes Against Magic, which is the Harley Quinn Chronicles by Stephen McHugh. So he's been on the podcast a few times. We did The Man from Nowhere, which is quite a brutal martial arts film, Korean one.
Yeah.
And this is all about kind of like King Arthur and things like that, and the magic and the round table and stuff, but if it was in the modern times. Okay. But the book kind of, he's trying to remember. What happened? Well, he kind of part of the book is set in, way back when, like the 1700s or whatever, and what's happening with witches being burned and things like that. But then it's actually set in the real world, and I forget how he gets to where he is, but he's basically almost in the modern world, and then having to do the magic and things like that.
Okay.
So that's definitely worth a read. quite a few books in that series. That's good fun. And then 13 Bullets, which is by David Wellington.
It's a graphic novel, isn't it?
Film. Yes.
I think. Hold on a second till I just.
Oh.
Oh no. Wrong one. 100 Bullets was what I was thinking of.
No. So this is it's based on Laura Caxon, and she's a vampire hunter.
Right. Okay.
And very interesting. A little bit like, not necessarily like Blade, but vampires used to be in the world, and they think they've gone, and then they kind of come back, and she has to hunt them down and things like that. And it's got quite a horror aspect to it, especially with how the vampires are described. Mm-hmm. So that is definitely worth a read. And I've actually got Cursed on the shelf behind me, where was it? Which he's done like werewolves.
Yeah.
So that's another David Wellington one. He was on the podcast as well. And this I bought thinking it was a Kindle book, and it actually came as a real book. So I do need to read it at some point. But so this has obviously got quite a interesting cover. But yeah, it's all about werewolves and things like that. But then the other side of it is all about vampires and things. So they're some ones that I've really enjoyed reading. And at the minute, I'm quite into a book that I've randomly found called Orphan X.
Right.
Which is basically, I did a Google search to say, where can I read books that are similar to John Wick?
Mm-hmm.
So I just kind of like, because that's my kind of genre. I do like the fantasy and I do like sci-fi, because I've read Leviathan and you know, things like that from whatever the TV show's called.
The Expanse.
Expanse, yes.
Leviathan, yes.
And basically, this guy he was an orphan. He was then trained to be a hitman in a way, and he was supposed to be kind of like an ethical one, and obviously it never works out that way. And then he ends up quitting that life, and he becomes the man from nowhere.
Right, okay.
And he basically gets his reputation from helping people, a little bit like Jack Reacher.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a way of, he would just go and take someone out, and the way it works is on a word of mouth. He says, right, go away. So, once he's helped them out, sorted them out, probably give him a bit of money and stuff, because he's invested it well and he doesn't need to earn the money. And he says to them, when you see someone else in distress or someone that needs my help, just pass my number on. Then destroy my number. You've never met me.
Yes.
And then that's how he gets, his jobs, if you like. And it's how it takes a bit of a different turn. So he's very methodical, very cold, that kind of killer aspect. Mm-hmm. And he then starts to get involved with a woman in his block, not romantically or anything like that, but he goes obviously in the lift, and he's got the top floor, a condo that he's got, but it's kitted out. It's very metal floors, concrete, all over, and it's like a fortress. And then he starts to kind of go, well, do I really want to live like this anymore? And then he accidentally, he tells this woman's son, who's 7, something like that, who's getting bullied, because he notices he's bruising. He's like, yes, I'm getting bullied at school. And he's like, well, you hit him first. If he starts bullying you, take him down. And then she has a go at him. There's a knock on the door one night. What the hell have you been telling my son? And then for a joke, he tells him to put bleach in his drink.
Oh, jeez.
But then he says, no, it's a joke. It's a joke. But then he tells his mum, and he's like, you can't go around saying that to kids because they'll do it. He goes, thankfully, he did take it as a joke.
Yeah.
And it's how he's got this, because something happens in the book. And, with his, he starts off with his first case, and then the second one starts to go a bit Pete Tong.
So is it that he takes this person as nearly like another adult figure or another father figure kind of thing?
Yeah,
and his influence like that. Yeah.
Yeah, she's like it's dead weird because she's a district attorney and he's a hired gun.
Oh right, okay.
But she's a single mum, and she's like a bit all over the place, trying to take calls, trying to do big cases, and then she's trying to look after this son on her own as well. And it just happens that things happen, and he ends up being with her, and he's very particular about a certain type of vodka he drinks, and he cooks himself these really nice meals, but he's sat alone. And then he accidentally he's helping her. He's accidentally took a bag of drugs that she's got from the pharmacy back to his place, and he's like, "Oh, I'll go and drop it down," expecting to be 2 minutes. And rather than having this really expensive steak that he's just cooked himself, he ends up having hot dogs and spaghetti with the family because he's helped them out. And it's like he's torn inside, but then also what's happening in the main story with this mission as well that's gone a bit awry. It's just really. I'm well over halfway through, and I only started it about a week or so ago.
I like that because that idea of what would we be like if we didn't have the things happen. Is I didn't meet my wife, I didn't have kids and family. Like I often say, if I'm by myself for about 2 or 3 days, which is happening actually this week as we're recording it, by myself, the kids are still away on holiday. Like I'll go to the garage and go, there's an offering 6-pack of crisps here. That might do me for dinner.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's an interesting reading. It's 8 books in the series.
Oh right, okay.
And the 8th one he's just released the 7th at the start of this year, and the 8th one's out next year. So fairly new series.
Yeah.
And so far so good. A few people I've read in the comments, as you do with reviews, moan that he likes a certain type of vodka. Well, technically he's a millionaire, so if he wants to buy that vodka, I'm not humble about that. They're calling him pretentious, but whatever.
Maybe that'll happen to you one day.
Even better.
Maybe that'll happen to you one day, Ali. There's somebody people go, God, what could I send them?
Yeah. Obviously not pop dolls, because I've got plenty of them.
Well, if I know anything about anybody that collects pop vinyls, they could always do with more.
Yeah, you can't even see them all.
I know. So good. Excellent. Well, that was a lot of fun, Ali. That was really a lot of fun. We'll have to do it again sometime. We'll pick something else at random, and see what we do. Because a bit like myself, you have a wide variety of interests and a lot of things that you like to do with your time between films, video games, F1, all of that kind of stuff. So it's kind of nice to touch base and get a bit of more insight of a series that I started, and I'm kind of querying whether to go on. And of course, we've been having this conversation, so it's in my head that I should just go straight on to Amazon, just get the next book. They're only a few pounds. That's one of the nice things about the Reacher series, is they're not a big money investment.
If you've got a Kindle as well, BookBub is really good, because
for picking those
I'm
things
a
up.
sucker for if it's 99p or if it's free, that's it. I'm in, and the amount of different books I've bought, I'm just like, why? But it sounds good, so you
can add it to the pile, and then you'll get it someday, and then you'll have like maybe the start of a new series that you kind of go right. Well, I'm up to date with that. I can start that. Let everybody know where they can find you. I'm going to stick links to various things down in the description, obviously, when I'm putting this up. So I'll link your YouTube channel, which is your gaming channel, for instance, on there and stuff. Yeah,
you can find me as Cornwolf pretty much everywhere. So Corn_Wolf on Twitter, and then I think I'm Cornwolf Gaming on Instagram, where I post little pictures of different things that I'm painting or collector Blu-rays that I've got and different things. And then on my YouTube channel, and then Filmguff for the podcast. And then I've got all the stuff, fingers in lots of pies, but that'll probably do for now.
We'll probably should mention that the Filmguff's doing a rather large piece of work at the moment, putting together a Christopher Nolan extravaganza, looking at his filmography. And by the time I put this up, it'll still be a while off being released, but certainly to keep an eye on it. I'm involved in it in some ways as well, so it's very exciting.
We've decided to do all, is it 12 films or something like that he's done. Some of them are harder to get. Roughly half an hour each on each film, with various guests, and talking about Christopher Nolan. And it's just a bit of an adventurous thing that myself and Kev decided to do, and go from there. And we've just released an episode on League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, if anybody remembers that film from the early noughties.
I do. One of my wife's favourites, actually. What a weird one. My wife has funny taste in movies, certain ones that she latches onto, and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is one of hers that sits outside what you'd normally watch. So that's kind of interesting.
And obviously you've been on there, and we've spoken about films and different ones that we're suckers for buying and whatnot. So we do have a very wide array of films, because Kev's very into the similar films to yourself. Some of the olden classics and stuff, and I'm a bit more modern with my tastes, and he's trying to win me over, and I try and win him over with some of mine.
That's it. Well, it's funny because like every time I do an episode with you, and even listen to each other, it is this kind of thing of, God, that sounds interesting, I'll try it out. That kind of thing where you feed off each other and go, we're all kind of open books, excuse the pun, to say, like, we don't necessarily know what we're going to like until we're in the middle of it. And it kind of opens our eyes a little bit to what's happening there. in the future.
Yeah, especially with horror films. I think I thought I never really liked them, but it turns out I've watched a lot.
Well, I'm the same. Like I would have told you if you'd have said to me 10 years ago, horror films are a genre that I don't like. So when somebody says to me, "God, I'm a wuss, I don't like horror films," I would say, well, I mean, I would agree with you, but it turns out that I've got more of a stomach, or what, you know, when I approach it mentally from another thing, I actually find them a lot of fun, and it kind of reframes the experience for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks, Ali, for coming along, and like I say, you can find them out in all the links below to find out what else you've been up to, and if you made it this far, thanks very much for watching. I'll speak to you again soon.